On this inside line, I'm going to show you everything you need to run a 37-inch tall tire with no lift on a 98 Dodge Viper. Or not. Definitely probably not. .450 horsepower, 490 pound-feet of torque. The second generation Dodge Viper has become a modern-day icon in its own right. Recognizable at a glance, this amazing poster car is now one of the most sought-after and collectible American-made cars. What I'm going to dive into today is some of the things that I've learned over the years about these cars, sort of their quirks, the good, the bad. If you're looking for one of these things, some things to definitely keep an eye out for. And we're going to do some basic service on a car that's been sitting for a long time. So if you're wondering why the car is sitting on 4 Rhino ramps, well, it's a pretty easy explanation. You got to have the car up high enough to get underneath of it to change the oil. Now the reason it has 4 is because the car needs to be level, because the Viper's engine has the oil drain plug in the center of the pan. I'm going to be using the recommended 10W30 synthetic oil. The only difference is I'm using Redline. I've been switching over to a lot of cars with Redline oil. I like it. It's just a really good performance oil. This engine, it needs a synthetic. It calls for it. So I've been happy with that. That's what I'm putting in here. It takes 8.5 quarts. I'm going to be using a Mopar oil filter to access that. It's right at the front of the engine. Once this thing's up in the air, it's pretty simple. You are planning on taking one of these cars on a long road trip. I'll say the seats are good, not great. You know, it's very, feels like it's sitting in a Dodge Durango. There's nothing particularly Viper about them. They do have a little bit more bolstering, and you definitely sit down in them. I don't know if I would consider this the ideal track seat, but it's not terrible for driving long distances. And the suspension of the car isn't overly stiff where you feel like it's going to bounce you around and make a longer drive super painful. There are some fun novelties where the seat belts come from the other side and things like that, but you know, the touch points aren't terrible. It's very 90s Dodge, so a lot of black plastic, nothing, no special stitching or anything like that. During the summertime, this car gets a lot of cabin heat, and it can make it downright miserable to be stuck in stop and go traffic. The air conditioning is just not great. Now, if you've got, you know, clear sailing in front of you, or cruising on the highway, it's fine, it's adequate. Stop and go, the interior of these cars just get really hot. Now, the original wheels were removed shortly after this car was new and replaced with a set of 18-inch forged wheels from Fixie. Now, given the car had been sitting for quite some time, it was in need of a new set of tires. So I decided to go on the more performance side and get a set of Nitto Tire NT 555 G2s for the front and a drag radial out back, which again is a Nitto Tire. It is a NT 555R rear. Now, both of these tires are DOT compliant, but they are very sticky and designed for cars with this type of high horsepower, and thankfully they come in a configuration where they are the right size for the car. Having a really good set of sticky tires makes all the difference in the world. Again, you got to remember, this car has no traction control, no ABS. I mean, it is just a rocket, and you really need to be able to have that grip for this thing not to feel like it wants to kill you all the time. And these tires really help with that tremendously. You know, it's a 335/30 rear, so it's a massive tire. It's already hard to get tires for this thing in general, so I'm stoked that Nitto even bothers to make a tire that's that wide for this. Up front, it's a little easier. I think it's like a 285. I'll put the exact size on the front, and that really makes a difference. They're a lot easier to find, but I mean, this tire rides really nice. It's not super loud. This combo in general, I feel like for Viper owners, at least the ones that I've seen and in my area, has been just a awesome go-to. If you're looking to purchase a 1996 to 2002 Dodge Viper, that is the Gen 2. That's what this 98 falls into the category of, and these things are super popular. Now, there are some things to look for, so I want to kind of go over a quick buyer's guide, give you sort of a punch list to look for. Number one, the hood. These things, obviously it's mostly hood, but they're incredibly expensive to replace. So if you find one that seems like a really good deal, but the guy says, oh, it's probably gonna need a hood, you can expect to spend up to $12,000 replacing this hood. There's just not a lot of these. You're gonna spend some serious money. The areas that you want to look for that typically are problems are around the NACA duct here, and you want to look around the hood, because a lot of times people will shut the hood at the lower side here and it'll end up giving you spider cracks everywhere. So you really want to watch for that. Beyond that, your basic, sports car things you need to look at, anything around the front splitter of the car, see if it's been cracked, if it's got a lot of scrapes in the front. I mean, this car's definitely got a few, so it's not perfect by any means along those lines. Another thing is, if you're going to crawl underneath the car, you have the ability to at least see it, maybe take it to a shop, get it on a rack. Look and see if it's got the 998 recall. Now, this was done to reinforces this front cross member that connects to the steering system. As you can see, these red tubes that are at the front of the engine, those are called smooth tubes. The earlier gens of these cars had more like accordion style intake tubes. The later ones, you'll find the smooth tube. They're actually good for about 10 horsepower. And these have the drop-in air filter. So if the car doesn't have that, not a big deal. The clamps and whatnot around them usually aren't an issue, so I wouldn't sweat that too much. One thing that I will say that I know is a common problem with these cars, and it might just be these early Gen 1, Gen 2 cars, but the power steering pulley is known to fail. It's a plastic unit from the factory, and it's been problematic. It was problematic on this car, and it was upgraded with the billet aluminum pulley. Another thing while you're looking at it, check out your plug wires. If they're the original ones, they're going to have dates on them, so you can get an idea if anyone's done plug wires on this car. Not a big deal, but it just kind of gives you a history of maintenance, especially when you're buying a car that's 20 plus years old. The other little quick thing to have on your punch list, I know I mentioned the power steering pump earlier, the actual pulley, but you want to look at the bracket and the cap. These things are notorious for coming loose, and it's sort of an atmospheric vent at the top, and that can be a big problem. They've been known to cause fires just from the cap getting loose, fluid getting onto the manifold, and yeah, that's a big deal. So just take a look at that, make sure the cap isn't cracked, there's no issues there. All basic Gen 2s had 488 cubic inch V10s. The big difference being in 2000s, the pistons were swapped over from forged to cast. Now, this really isn't a big deal unless you plan on doing some significant boost upgrades. So if you want to put a Rose supercharger or a turbo kit on this, you're going to want to swap out those cast pistons for forged ones. So just something to keep in mind. Now, most of the car is essentially fiberglass with the exception of these lower units here. Now, these are all aluminum, and this is where the cats are routed originally. Now, the first gens actually had the exhaust dump out right here, and when they went to Gen 2, they made the exhaust route out the back of the car, but that didn't change basically the location of where the cats were. This gets really freaking hot, and you got to be super careful stepping in and out of these cars. There's a little warning sticker here just for that. But something you'll want to look for is if you have any bubbling in the paint or if there's been any damage done to it. Another thing is, if you're already looking at this area, you're going to want to look on the bottom side and see if there's been any scratches, or if it's been marked up from taking that to a track or anything like that. Getting into the driver's seat, If you depress the clutch and it feels super light, that's not a good thing. These things feel like a big heavy duty truck clutch. And if it feels super light, that's a good chance that you have a throwout bearing issue. So something that's common, more common in higher mileage cars than anything else, but just something to be aware of. Now this does have the later model shift knob that came from a 2000. A big difference is in the dash. You'll see here, the early ones had a very matte looking finished dash and it scratched and it just didn't look really good. As the cars got a little bit later, the dashes got better. Mostly it was the 96 and 97s that had the, we'll just call it the bad dash. You know, as these cars got more specialized and they had different variants and versions, the interior got a little bit better. The seats were always pretty much the same, same bolstering and type of leather. Obviously, you want to look and make sure that this has been taken care of. Mine have footprints all over them from my 6-year-old and 3-year-old crawling in and out of it, but hey, that's how it goes. Opening and shutting the doors, you actually really have to, everything on this thing, you kind of have to slam. That's just the way these cars are, but what you want to see is when you open the door, does it sag? Does it kind of drop down at all? Or is it swinging out nice and easily? These cars have a little bit of a detent to it, but not much. But the whole point here is you want to make sure the door itself isn't sagging down. And then you got to put some force to it, which I didn't even shut it all the way to shut these things. It's kind of funny how much force you got to do that. These things are known for their hinges getting a little saggy. I think that's from people just crawling in and out the way they do. I mean, obviously it's a low car, so that can be, you know, more difficult just for people getting in and out. And yeah, I would say the other thing that's worth mentioning is if it's a 2001 and newer, so your 2001, 2002, you can get these cars with ABS. And, you know, this thing has no ABS. And I will say, ABS on a car like this would actually be a good thing. These things are known, I think it's the front right is known to go brake heavy and lock up, but I've never had a super big issue with that. But I do know many people that are into these cars and they say, hey, the 2001 just feels safer, it's a little bit easier to drive, and if you're driving it every day, it's a worth having feature. So those are sort of my punch list things if you're going to be looking for one. The main thing being, check out the hood. If it does still have the factory 17s, note that they are hard to find tires for. This obviously has these 18s, so that's not as big of a deal, but just something to keep in mind. Hopefully you guys found this informative. If you guys have any questions for me, you can always find me at Ali Mansour Editor on Instagram, and hopefully you guys enjoy these. Please like, subscribe, comment below, let us know if there's any other cars you'd like us to review, and hopefully we'll be seeing you guys on the road soon. Bye-bye.